Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
The empty pedestal. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun, illuminating the cavernous hall. Jason stopped just inside the arched doorway. The scent of old wood and faded grandeur thick in the air was a smell he hadn't encountered in over a decade. A smell that dragged him back, unwillingly, to a life he tried to leave behind. Statham Manor, a mausoleum of faded glory. He hadn't expected a welcoming committee, and he wasn't disappointed. The only sound was the creak of the ancient timbers adjusting to the day's heat. He ran a hand over the worn leather of his duffel bag, the gesture more for reassurance than practicality. The city had stripped him of sentimentality. He hoped the country hadn't resurrected it. A cough broke the silence. A stooped figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the hall. Mr. Abernathy, the estate manager, his face etched with worry lines deeper than Jason remembered. "Mr. Statham," Abernathy said, his voice a dry rustle. "We weren't expecting you so soon." "I telegraphed," Jason replied, his voice flat. He hadn't telegraphed, he'd just shown up, driven by a feeling he couldn't quite name, a sense of unease that had settled deep in his gut. Yes, of course, a temporary misunderstanding." Abernathy wrung his hands, the gesture amplifying the nervous energy radiating from him. "Perhaps we should retire to the study? I have some matters to discuss." The study hadn't changed. The same mahogany desk, the same worn leather chairs, the same oppressive portraits of stern-faced Statham ancestors glowering down from the walls. It felt like stepping back into a photograph he'd deliberately torn to shreds years ago. Abernathy fussed with the curtains, letting in a sliver of light that illuminated the dust clinging to the bookshelves. "Tea, Mr. Statham?" he offered, his voice trembling slightly. "Just tell me," Jason said, cutting through the preamble. "What's wrong?" Abernathy's shoulders slumped. He walked to the fireplace, though there was no fire, and stared into the empty grate. "The estate. It's gone, Mr. Statham. Bankrupt. Every last acre. Gone." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jason felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a play unfold, a play he had no part in. "How?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Bad investments, Mr. Statham. Years of mismanagement. Your father?" Abernathy trailed off, unable to meet Jason's gaze. Jason knew. His father had been a gambler, a risk-taker who chased fortune with the recklessness of a man who believed he couldn't lose. He'd lost. And now, Jason was paying the price. "And?" Jason prompted, steel edging his tone. He wasn't shocked by the news of the bankruptcy. He'd suspected as much. What truly troubled him was the reason he felt compelled to return. Abernathy shuffled his feet. There's something else, Mr. Statham. Something missing." Jason felt a tightening in his chest. "What's missing?" Abernathy hesitated, then pointed towards a small, empty pedestal in the corner of the room. A pedestal Jason remembered well. "The gladius, Mr. Statham. It's gone." A jolt, sharp and unexpected, ran through Jason. The gladius. The family heirloom. The symbol of the Statham legacy. He remembered his grandfather, old and frail, lying in his deathbed. The smell of antiseptic and impending doom had hung heavy in the air. Jason, barely a teenager, had knelt beside him. Jason. His grandfather had rasped, his grip surprisingly strong. The gladius. "It's more than just steel. It's our history. Our honor. Protect it. Never let it fall into the wrong hands." He had sworn, a solemn oath whispered in the face of death. And now, the gladius was gone. "When?" Jason demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Weeks ago, Mr. Statham. We hoped it was misplaced. But it's not here. I fear it was stolen." Abernathy wrung his hands again, his face pale. "Stolen. Or sold?" Jason knew his father. Desperate times called for desperate measures. He walked over to the empty pedestal, the smooth marble cold beneath his fingertips. The absence of the gladius was more than just a loss. It was a violation, a betrayal of his grandfather's dying wish. "Who knew about the gladius?" Jason asked, his eyes narrowed. Everyone, Mr. Statham, that it's been in the family for generations. Too many people. But someone had known its true value. Someone had known how to exploit the Statham family's misfortune. Jason turned to Abernathy, his gaze piercing. I need everything you have. Every record, every transaction, every name connected to this estate. Everything. Abernathy nodded, relief flooding his face. Of course, Mr. Statham. Anything. Jason stared at the empty pedestal, the sun glinting off the polished surface. He felt a cold fury rising within him, a burning need to right the wrong that had been done. The city had taught him how to survive. Statham Manor would remind him what he was fighting for. He turned and walked towards the door, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He had a gladius to find, and a family legacy to reclaim. The peace he had sought for so long was gone, replaced by a purpose, a burning fire that threatened to consume him. He welcomed it. He needed it. Whispers in London. The Thames sloshed against the embankment, a greasy black mirror reflecting the city's neon glow. Jason pulled his collar higher. The London chill a familiar bite after the humid heat of Marrakesh. He needed Mac, and Mac needed to be convinced. He hadn't seen the man in almost a decade. Not since things went sideways in Prague. He found Mac's workshop tucked away in a railway arch near Waterloo. The air inside smelled of gun oil, solder, and something vaguely floral, like potpourri, trying to mask the scent of impending violence. Mac, thicker around the middle and sporting a salt and pepper beard, was hunched over a workbench, fiddling with the innards of a drone. He looked up, a flicker of surprise, and something else Jason couldn't quite place, crossing his face. Jason, bloody hell, didn't think I'd see you again. Mac wiped his hands on a rag, the gesture more weary than welcoming. Mac, that I need your help. Jason didn't bother with pleasantries. Time was a luxury he couldn't afford. Mac raised an eyebrow, gesturing to a rickety chair with a half-eaten sandwich sitting on it. That obvious, is it? Last I heard, you were off the grid, enjoying early retirement. Jason ignored the sandwich and leaned forward, his voice low. Someone stole something from my family, a significant something. And I need to find them. Mac's eyes narrowed. He knew enough about Jason's family to understand the gravity of the situation. What was it? A signet ring. Passed down for generations. It surfaced in Morocco, then disappeared again. I'm tracking the buyer. Mac was silent for a moment, the only sound the hum of machinery. And you think this buyer is in London? The trail leads here. I have a name. Silas Thorne. Mac chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Silas Thorne? Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. He's connected. Very connected. You'll need more than just a name to get close to him. That's where you come in. I need access. Contacts. People who know the underbelly. Mac hesitated, his gaze fixed on the drone. Getting involved with Thorne, it's risky. Jason, he doesn't play nice. Neither do I, Jason stated flatly. Mac sighed, a puff of air that ruffled his beard. All right, I owe you one. From Prague. But don't expect any miracles. And don't expect me to hold your hand. This is your fight. Mac made a call, speaking in hushed tones into a burner phone. He rattled off a string of coded phrases Jason didn't recognize, references to old jobs and shared history. When he hung up, he turned back to Jason, his expression grim. I've put you in touch with a bloke called Fingers Malone. He runs a pawn shop in Whitechapel. Sticky fingers, loose lips. He might have heard something about Thorne's acquisitions. Max scribbled an address on a scrap of paper. Be careful, Jason. Fingers isn't exactly trustworthy. And Thorne, he has eyes everywhere. Whitechapel throbbed with a chaotic energy, a vibrant tapestry of smells, sounds, and languages. Fingers' pawn shop was a dimly lit cave crammed with dusty relics and questionable merchandise. Fingers himself, a skinny man with greasy hair and darting eyes, looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. Jason showed him a photo of the signet ring. Fingers squinted, his gaze lingering a little too long. Nice piece. Fingers croaked, his voice raspy. Heard whispers about it. Said it belonged to some old family. Big money involved. Silas Thorne. Jason pressed, his voice low. Was he involved? Fingers hesitated, wiping his hands on his stained apron. I don't know names, mate. Just heard talk. The ring was fenced through a shell company. Something about Blackwood Enterprises. Blackwood Enterprises. Jason tucked the name away. A starting point. Anything else? Fingers shifted nervously. Just be careful. Thorne doesn't like people asking questions, especially about his business. As Jason left the shop, the feeling of being watched intensified. He scanned the crowded street, but couldn't pinpoint the source. Thorne was already onto him. The game had begun. Monaco's glittering trap. Monaco, a jeweled cascade clinging to the coastline, pulsed with light beneath a sky the color of sapphires. From his perch high above, Jason felt the Mediterranean's warm breath, yet the anxiety coiled tighter within him. Isabel's clipped message had been the spark. Silas, the embezzler who drained his family's coffers, was here. An auction. A clandestine affair for the world's most opulent and unscrupulous, beckoned like a siren song. He's gunning for something massive. Isabel had rasped, urgency staining her tone. They call it the serpents. I had no clue what it is. But the estimated value, it's stratospheric. Jason scrubbed a hand over his scalp. Stratospheric fell short. He faced a thief driven by more than mere lucre. Ambition fueled Silas. Each stolen dollar a foothold in his ascent to power. He scanned the panorama. Casinos, like beacons of fortune, cast dazzling reflections. Yachts swayed gently in the marina, each a floating palace of indulgence, a gilded cage, ideal for Silas's machinations. He found Isabel tucked away in a quiet cafe. She sat hunched at a corner table, a neglected espresso growing. Cold beside her, her features drawn with worry. "Thanks for coming," she murmured, her voice hushed. "I managed to unearth some intel on the auction. It's at the Maison d'Or, an institution renowned for its discretion and impenetrable defenses. They cater solely to collectors of exquisite tastes." Jason slid into the seat opposite her. Security measures. Suffocating. Biometrics, pressure sensors, infrared nets, the whole 9 yards. And that's just the perimeter. Inside, I imagine it's a fortress. Silas won't be strolling through the main entrance. He leaned in, sketching out his plan, a high-stakes gamble hinging on an overlooked weakness in the auction house's fortifications. A delivery bay primarily used for substantial artworks at a slim chance, but his only avenue. Isabel listened, a crease forming between her brows. "It's bold, but feasible. I can access tomorrow's delivery manifest. A shipment of antique furniture is scheduled for early arrival. You could exploit that as camouflage. Get it done." His tone brooked no argument. Success was imperative. He had to intercept Silas before he liquidated the Serpent's Eye and vanished once more into the shadowy ecosystem of global crime. As they hammered out the finer details, a woman entered the cafe, her presence instantly commanding attention, statuesque and composed, with sharp, discerning eyes. Her severe ponytail and tailored suit exuded authority, not mere affluence. Her gaze swept the room, briefly snagging on Jason before settling on Isabel. "Moreau," she stated, her voice clipped and professional. "We need to talk." Isabel tensed. "Rossi. I wasn't expecting you." "Silas Thorne," Rossi countered, bypassing Isabel's thinly veiled animosity. "He's on my radar. And you, Moreau, have a history of associating with individuals of dubious repute." She pivoted towards Jason, her eyes narrowing. "And you are just a tourist?" Jason offered, carefully modulating his tone. Rossi remained unconvinced. Suspicion flickered in her gaze, her mind working at lightning speed. Law enforcement, without a doubt. Interpol, most likely, and she was hunting the same prey. Thorne is wanted for fraud, money laundering, and a litany of other financial offenses. Rossi continued, addressing Isabel while maintaining eye contact with Jason. "He's an elusive character, but he invariably leaves traces. And those traces led me here, to you." Isabel sighed, resignation in her voice. "I haven't seen him in months." Rossi's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Don't underestimate me, Moreau. I know you possess knowledge, and I intend to extract it." She presented Isabel with a card. "When you decide to cooperate, you know how to reach me." Casting a final, penetrating glance at Jason, she departed, leaving a palpable tension in her wake, like the lingering scent of ozone. Jason followed her departure, his thoughts churning. He wasn't alone in this chase, and Rossi was no simple adversary. This alluring snare of Monaco had just become considerably more perilous, the serpent in disguise. The hushed opulence of the auction house was a suffocating blanket. Chandeliers dripped light onto the assembled elite, faces tight with predatory desire, voices murmuring appraisals and boasts. Jason, clad in a tailored suit that felt like a borrowed skin, moved through them like a ghost, his senses heightened, a predator amidst the gilded prey. The air reeked of expensive perfume and desperation. Security was tight. Each guest had been vetted, scanned, and politely but firmly reminded of the consequences of causing a scene, but Jason had a way of slipping through cracks, of becoming a shadow in the light. He scanned the room, a grid forming in his mind, systematically eliminating faces. He was looking for a serpent, but a serpent draped in the finery of a peacock. Sophia's intel had been precise. Silas Thorne, posing as a Dutch art collector named Van der Linde. A name whispered with reverence in certain circles. Then he saw him. By the far wall, a man with silvered hair, impeccably tailored in a dark velvet jacket, held court. His smile was a practiced art, revealing just enough teeth to hint at power. Van der Linde. Or rather, Silas Thorne. Jason felt a familiar knot tighten in his gut. Thorne, a master of disguise, was far more dangerous than any brute force thug. He relied on cunning, on manipulation, on the weaknesses of others. Jason moved closer, a silent current against the tide of bodies. He watched as Thorne subtly directed a nod towards a passing server, who immediately presented him with a crystal flute of champagne. The small gesture spoke volumes. Thorne was comfortable, confident, in control. He reached Thorne just as the auctioneer, a flamboyant man with a voice that could shatter glass, announced the next item. Lot number 12. A Roman gladius, authenticated to the 1st century. A truly remarkable artifact. Gentlemen, ladies, bidding will begin at. Jason cut him off, his voice low, a rumble that cut through the murmurs. Silas. Fancy seeing you here. Thorne's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something cold and reptilian passed through his eyes. He took a slow sip of champagne. I believe you have me mistaken. Sir, I am Adrian van der Linde, and you are? Someone who knows you stole something that doesn't belong to you. Jason's hand moved subtly inside his jacket, finding the reassuring cold steel of his own weapon. The change in Thorne was instantaneous. The charming art collector vanished, replaced by the hardened criminal Jason had expected. The champagne flute shattered on the floor, the sound swallowed by the rising murmur of the crowd. You shouldn't have come here, Statham, Thorne hissed, his voice now devoid of any accent. This isn't your playground. He made a subtle gesture with his hand, and 2 men, built like brick walls, detached themselves from the crowd and moved towards Jason. It is now, Jason replied, his voice like steel. Where's the ring, Silas? The gladius was displayed on a rotating pedestal. Bathed in spotlights, Thorne's eyes flicked to it, then back to Jason. You're a fool if you think I'd tell you that. Jason moved with a speed that belied his size. He sidestepped one of Thorne's thugs, using his momentum to slam him into the other. They crumpled to the floor, groaning. But the distraction had bought Thorne the time he needed. He darted towards the gladius, snatched it from the pedestal, and disappeared into the crowd. Jason swore. He shoved his way through the throng, ignoring the startled cries and angry glares. That he caught a glimpse of Thorne disappearing through a side exit, the gladius glinting in. His hand. He burst through the door, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Thorne was already halfway across the courtyard, heading towards a waiting black sedan. Jason sprinted after him, his boots pounding on the cobblestones. Thorne reached the car, slid inside, and the engine roared to life. Jason was close enough to grab the door handle, but Thorne slammed the door shut, narrowly missing his fingers. The car screeched away, leaving Jason standing in the courtyard, the scent of burnt rubber filling the air. That he was too late. That he stared after the retreating car. His jaw tight, Thorne had escaped, and he now had the gladius. This was far from over. It was only just beginning. Wheels and water. The Aston Martin shuddered, tires wailing as Jason fought it through another switchback. Monaco. A gilded cage, flaunted its opulence with treacherous roads, hardly conducive to a clean getaway. Silas Thorne, piloting a garish yellow Ferrari, exploited every curve and incline. Thinking you're untouchable, Silas? Jason's voice, tight with fury, battled the static emanating from the hacked radio, ripped from the Ferrari at the hotel. It was now a useless brick, save for the white noise accompanying the hammer of his pulse. Acrid fumes of scorched rubber stung his nostrils. He caught a glimpse of Thorne's self-satisfied smirk in the Ferrari's mirror. A fleeting portrait of arrogance. The man was a serpent, all polished surface and concealed poison. Snatching the ring was audacious. Fencing it bordered on treason. Jason wasn't merely reclaiming an heirloom. He was dismantling a dangerous network. Thorne jerked the wheel, narrowly missing a delivery van laden with baguettes. The Aston Martin, a steel predator, remained glued to his tail. That a quick downshift elicited a defiant roar from the engine as he pressed closer, intent on forcing a fatal error. Ahead, the cerulean Mediterranean beckoned, the harbor. Thorne was making for the water. The Ferrari shrieked onto the pier, scattering tourists and oblivious sunbathers. The Aston Martin followed, leaving a cloud of dust and a chorus of irate shouts in its wake. Thorne skidded to a halt beside a pristine yacht, the Serafina etched in elegant lettering across its stern. Thorne leaped from the Ferrari, clutching a small, ornamented box, the ring, that he bolted up the gangplank. Yelling something lost to the growing wail of approaching sirens, Jason slammed the Aston Martin into gear, tires spitting pebbles. That he exploded from the vehicle, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Vaulting a bollard, he ignored the jolt of pain in his shoulder and raced towards the yacht. Thorne, you won't escape me. The gangplank whirred, retracting. Jason lunged, his fingers clamping around the polished teak railing. Just as it lifted, he groaned with strain. His muscles screaming as he hauled himself aboard, he landed hard on the deck, sprawling amongst the plush cushions of a sun lounger. Thorne stood near the yacht's helm, a cold smile playing on his lips. Two hulking figures, faces like granite, moved to intercept him. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Statham," Thorne purred, his voice laced with false cordiality. "I'm afraid our little game concludes here." Jason scrambled upright, dismissing the ache in his shoulder. "It concludes when I say it does, Thorne." The bruisers advanced at a swift feint to the left, then a right, culminated in a sharp kick to the first man's knee. A brutal elbow to the second man's temple followed, felling him like a tree. Thorne's smile flickered. "You're making a critical error." Jason advanced, relentless. He inhaled the salty tang of the air, the scent of expensive varnish, and the raw fear emanating from Thorne. He was within striking distance. Suddenly, a thunderous roar reverberated from the yacht's engines. The Serafina surged forward, slicing through the water with brutal power. Jason stumbled. Losing his footing, he grabbed for the railing, narrowly avoiding a plunge into the churning water. Thorne seized the opportunity, vanishing below deck. He reappeared a moment later on the bridge, brandishing a megaphone. "Goodbye, Mr. Statham. Perhaps our paths will cross in the hereafter." He laughed, the sound amplified across the water. The yacht accelerated, rapidly distancing itself from the harbor. Jason watched, jaw clenched, as it knifed through the waves, bound for open sea. Stranded, alone on the quayside, the approaching sirens grew deafening, promising questions he had no patience for. He spat on the ground. Thorne might have gained a temporary reprieve, but Jason Statham was not so easily deterred. This was a chapter closed. Not the book. He still possessed the useless radio, and an unquenchable thirst for retribution. The hunt was far from over. It had only just intensified. Mediterranean pursuit. The marina reeked of diesel and salt. Jason ignored it, his eyes fixed on the white yacht disappearing over the horizon. Serafina. Silas Thorne was getting away. He scanned the docks, a grim satisfaction tightening his jaw as he spotted a sleek, unoccupied speedboat, its mooring lines carelessly secured. No time for niceties. He vaulted aboard, ripped the canvas cover off the console, and located the ignition. A quick hot wire, a skill long dormant but never truly forgotten, and the engine sputtered to life, then roared. The owner, a fat man in a floral shirt clutching a half-eaten cannoli, waddled onto the dock, shouting obscenities in rapid Italian. Jason ignored him, slamming the throttle forward, The speedboat leaped across the water, throwing a plume of spray as he gripped the wheel, bracing himself against the sudden acceleration. The Serafina was a speck on the horizon, but he was gaining. The Mediterranean wasn't cooperating. The gentle azure he'd seen from the shore was a deceptive facade. Choppy waves slammed against the hull, sending jolts through his spine. He squinted, the wind whipping his hair across his face. The sky was darkening, the cheerful blue being swallowed by bruised purple clouds. That a storm was brewing. Perfect. He navigated the treacherous swells, relying on instinct and a lifetime spent around boats. Each wave was a gamble, a test of his skill. He pushed the engine harder, the speedometer needle trembling near its maximum. He had to reach Thorn before he vanished. Into the open sea. A flash of blue and white cut through the gray, growing larger with terrifying speed. A Coast Guard vessel. Sophia Rossi. He should have known. He cursed under his breath. Rossi wouldn't let him just waltz off to commit what she'd undoubtedly consider vigilantism. She hailed him over the radio, her voice crackling with authority. Jason Statham, this is the Italian Coast Guard. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. He ignored her, weaving between the cresting waves, making the speedboat dance. Rossi wasn't stupid. She knew he wouldn't stop. He glanced back. The Coast Guard vessel was gaining, its superior size allowing it to cut through the rough water with ease. He needed a distraction. He spotted a cluster of small fishing boats huddled near a rocky outcrop. Seeking shelter from the approaching storm, he steered towards them. Knowing the maneuver was risky as he neared the fishing boats, he cut the engine. Letting the momentum carry him, he yelled a warning in broken Italian, hoping they understood. Then, just as the Coast Guard vessel drew alongside, he slammed the throttle forward again, sending a wall of water crashing over the fishing boats. The fishermen cursed and waved their fists, but they also blocked Rossi's path, buying him precious seconds. He risked another glance back. Rossi was maneuvering around the chaos, her face a mask of fury. He could almost hear her shouting, "Good." Let her shout. He had bigger fish to fry. The storm hit, rain lashed down, blurring his vision. The waves grew larger, angrier, threatening to swallow the speedboat whole. He wrestled with the wheel, battling the elements. He could barely see the Serafina now, just a faint outline swallowed by the squall. He tasted salt, felt the sting of wind and rain on his skin. Doubt gnawed at him. Was this madness? Chasing a ghost across a raging sea? But then he remembered the ring, the legacy Thorn had stolen, the memory of his grandfather's calloused hand pressing it into his own. He gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white. He wouldn't let Thorn get away with it, not now. Not ever. He powered on, into the heart of the storm. The Serafina was out there, somewhere, and he would find it. Island of Shadows. Serafina's wake, a luminous gash on the Aegean's dark surface, dwindled as Jason clung to the horizon line. His transport, a reeking fishing trawler, offered little comfort beyond proximity. Silas believed he'd vanished at a grave miscalculation. Dawn painted the sky in shades of amethyst and violet, revealing a volcanic island thrusting from the sea at Silas's refuge. Jason silenced the trawler's engine, letting it ghost toward a secluded inlet nestled amongst crags that resembled the fangs of some primeval beast. The air lay thick with the stench of sulfur and decay, and an unsettling aura permeated the very stones, securing a grappling hook to the cliff's face. He tested its purchase before commencing his climb. The rock offered little resistance, crumbling beneath his touch, each upward inch a gamble reaching the summit. He flattened himself against the coarse vegetation, peering down below. A compound sprawled, an unnatural imposition on the raw landscape. Gleaming structures of steel and glass clashed with the island's ancient bones. Satellite dishes sprouted like metallic toadstools. Armed figures paced the perimeter with chilling precision. Silas wasn't merely concealed. He was entrenched. Jason became a wraith, using shadow and broken ground as his allies. He sought intel, a blueprint for infiltration. A sharp clang resonated through the air. A guard, near the precipice, dislodging a sheet of corrugated iron. Time for improvisation. Jason tossed a scattering of pebbles into the dense foliage opposite the guard, summoning him toward a phantom threat. As the guard cautiously advanced, Jason dropped soundlessly behind. A length of discarded rope forming a makeshift garrote in his hands. At a swift, efficient strike, the man slumped to the earth, unheard, dragging the body into the dense scrub. He appropriated the guard's weapon and comms, then shed his own clothes for the ill-fitting uniform that he activated the comms device. "Sector 4, all secure," he rasped, his vocal cords, mimicking the fallen guard's deep timbre at a pause. Then a curt reply. "Patrol continues." Adrenaline surged as he ventured deeper at a garage housed armored personnel carriers. A helipad boasted a menacing black helicopter poised for flight, and a barack pulsed with the low hum of off-duty mercenaries. Silas had come prepared. He reached a central structure, its windows tinted and impenetrable twin guards. Their eyes honed to detect any anomaly, stood motionless at the entrance. A direct approach was suicide, and he required a diversion. Spotting a fuel tanker stationed near the helipad, cruel smile flickered across Jason's face. This would be spectacular. He severed the fuel line and forced the accelerator, sending the vehicle hurtling toward the helicopter. The subsequent detonation shook the ground, spewing fire and shrapnel. Bedlam erupted, panic seized the guards, alarms screeched, and the sentries at the central building faltered, their focus momentarily stolen by the inferno. It was the sliver of opportunity Jason craved. He melted into the confusion and gained entry. Inside, the air was cool and aseptic, a stark contrast to the raging conflagration outside. He advanced through silent corridors, drawn by the murmur of voices. He found himself in a vast laboratory. Scientists in lab coats flitted around complex apparatus, their expressions frantic, and there, at the room's heart, bathed in the eerie glow of a laser grid, sat the Gladius. The ancient bronze gleamed under the sterile lights. Secured within a framework of metal, a monitor displayed complex schematics, highlighting the blade's elemental composition and structural vulnerabilities. Silas's objective became chillingly clear. He wasn't seeking sanctuary. He was bent on destruction. He intended to obliterate the Gladius. A voice echoed from behind. Impressive resourcefulness, Statham. But ultimately a waste of effort. Silas stood framed in the doorway, a predatory smile twisting his lips. Behind him, the two entrance sentries, now reinforced by a dozen mercenaries, leveled their weapons at Jason. Temple showdown. The temple air, thick with the tang of dust and the ghosts of forgotten rituals, mocked the artificial Eden Silas had cultivated beyond its walls. Jason, a wraith in motion, welcomed the coolness of the flagstones beneath his scarred leather boots. Silas's bellows echoed, a frantic symphony of impending doom bouncing off the weathered stone. "Faster! Blast you! He'll be here any minute." Rounding the corner, Jason found Silas posturing before the altar, desperation etched into every line of his face. A small, metal container pulsed with a malevolent crimson light, its glow painting the scene in shades of dread. Two hulking brutes, weapons brandished, stood sentinel between Jason and Silas. But Jason's gaze was laser-focused on Silas himself, the antique Gladius a silver promise in his grip. "Jason," Silas spat, a veneer of composure barely masking the tremor in his voice. "So predictable. I knew you'd slither back." "The blade," Jason stated, his voice a monotone devoid of warmth. "Return it, Silas." A grating laugh ripped from Silas's throat. "Hand it over?" "Hardly. It's far more than a mere relic, Jason. It's a key. A catalyst." He flourished toward the radiant box. "Soon, this entire island will be cinders. A pristine beginning. You can't hinder progress." Jason surged forward, a blur of controlled violence. He evaded the first guard's clumsy swipe, a targeted kick to the joint crumpling the man like a discarded puppet. The second fared no better. His weapon wrestled away with ruthless efficiency before being slammed against a towering pillar of mercenaries. Nothing more than poorly trained muscle. Silas recoiled as his protectors crumpled, clutching the Gladius as if it were a lifeline. "You utter fool, Jason. Everything could have been yours. Opulence, dominion, the world at your beck and call. I possess all that truly matters," Jason countered, closing the gap between them. "And you stand on the precipice of losing everything you hold dear." Silas threw himself forward, the Gladius a streak of reflected light in the gloom. Jason met the assault, the reverberating clash of steel a stark counterpoint to the eerie hum emanating from the altar. Silas fought with wild abandon, his movements fueled by raw fear. But Jason remained a study in composure, each movement precise and deliberate. He weaved, deflected, and countered, systematically dismantling Silas's desperate offense. An opportunity materialized, and he exploited it without hesitation, deflecting Silas's arm and delivering a sharp, decisive blow to his wrist. The gladius hit the floor with a dull thud. Kicking it aside, Jason seized Silas by the throat, slamming him against the cold stone of the altar. The kill switch? Where? Jason demanded, his grip tightening like a vice. Silas gurgled, his eyes wide pools of terror. Too late, he wheezed. Already initiated. He jerked his chin toward the glowing box. 10 minutes. The island gone. Jason released Silas, his attention riveted on the countdown device. 10 minutes remain. No time for finesse. He snatched up the gladius and pivoted back to Silas. The Seraphina? Jason inquired, his tone low and urgent. Is she prepared? Silas, hacking and gasping for breath, managed a curt nod. Awaiting the northern docks. Sheathing the gladius, Jason knew he couldn't risk attempting to disable the box. Only one course remained. He seized Silas by his collar and hauled him toward the exit. What are you doing? Silas shrieked, his gaze darting wildly about, panic blossoming in his eyes. You can't leave me here to die. You charted your course, Silas, Jason stated, his voice devoid of pity. Now you must navigate the consequences. He dragged Silas out of the oppressive darkness of the temple and into the blinding sunlight, toward the northern docks and the waiting yacht. The clock was relentlessly ticking. He could detect the barely audible thrum of the device, a morbid metronome counting down to oblivion. This island, with its fabricated paradise and veiled treachery, was destined for oblivion, and Silas, the architect of its fall, was destined to witness its fiery demise firsthand. Legacy restored. The blast wave hammered Jason against the craggy cliff face, its heat searing. He clawed for purchase, his nails scraping against the loose, volcanic rock. The island below shuddered, a plume of fire and ash erupting from the fallen temple's location. A hair's breadth escape. Alessandro's expertly crafted detonator had transformed the island into a death trap. Adrenaline surged as Jason hauled himself upward. A swift glance confirmed the yacht, his would-be sanctuary, shrinking to a mere fleck against the vast horizon, its autopilot set for open water. Alessandro had underestimated him, a recurring error on the man's part. Reaching the summit, he battled the gale, the wind tearing at his saturated clothes. The sea stretched endlessly before him, an uncaring expanse, a piece of wreckage. Astonishingly, a fragment of the temple danced on the waves. He plunged, the wind howling in his ears, and crashed into the water. The debris, miraculously afloat, became his salvation. Hours later, bruised and spent, a fishing trawler hauled him aboard. The weathered fisherman offered a terse nod and a steaming thermos of robust coffee. Words were superfluous. The ocean understood that IT had tested his limits, battered his resolve, and ultimately delivered him. 2 days on, Jason stood before Statham Manor's gates. The wrought iron, once proudly polished, now sported a tapestry of rust and clinging ivy, a somber reflection of his family's decline. With a groan that echoed through the desolate grounds, the gates yielded to his push. The manor, a Gothic behemoth of shadow-stained stone and vacant windows, stood like a mausoleum. He trod through the neglected gardens, the heavy scent of damp earth mingling with the ghost of decaying roses. He pictured his grandfather, calloused hands carefully tending those same roses, spinning tales of ancestry, of honor and obligation, stories he had once dismissed as fanciful notions. The main entrance, unlocked, revealed wood warped and split. Inside, a stagnant atmosphere hung thick with dust and the musty odor of decay. Moonlight pierced the shattered stained glass windows, painting eerie patterns on the peeling walls. That he navigated the familiar, yet alien corridors, his footsteps the only sound in the oppressive silence. He found the study unchanged. The armchair worn smooth with age, the mahogany desk laden with papers, his grandfather's portrait overseeing all from above the fireplace. And there, above the mantel, the void where the gladius had resided. He reached into his pack, his fingers closing around the gladius' cool, hard hilt, retrieved from Alessandro's vault after their final encounter. The charlatan had slipped away, vanished like smoke, but the blade was safe. Drawing a deep breath, Jason secured the gladius back on its mount, it seated flawlessly. As if it had never departed in the moonlight, the blade shimmered, a silent witness to his family's past, a guiding light for their future. He settled into his grandfather's chair, the leather sighing beneath him. He closed his eyes, exhaustion claiming him at last. He saw his grandfather's visage, pride mingling with a hint of melancholy in his eyes. He grasped it now that it wasn't about wealth, renown, or triumph. That it was about lineage, heritage, integrity. He opened his eyes, a newfound determination sculpting his features. He faced a monumental task. The manor lay derelict, the grounds overgrown, the family name tarnished. But he was a Statham, and Stathams persevered, rising to his feet, spine erect, shoulders squared. He faced the challenge. The gladius above shone with renewed hope. He would resurrect the manor, cultivate the grounds, and reclaim his family's honor. He would cherish his grandfather's memory and forge a future for his descendants. He left the study, venturing into the manor's gloom. But now, fear was absent. He was home and poised for action.